I'd like to start by welcoming everybody and thanking you for joining us today. It's really great to be here. I'd like to start, though, by reminding us how we did get here. These community discussions, as we call them, first started in July as a wave of protest were going on in response to the killing of George Floyd. At our very first one of these discussions, we had over 100 CICS community members show up for that first meeting and first discussion. And it was clear that the community wanted to make some steps and really see what we could do to fight racism. So since then, we've held 5 similar discussions on topics ranging from classroom and community climate to equity in the broader computing ecosystem. Meanwhile, we formed a new committee, the Committee Against Racism and for Equity, CARE for short, under the leadership now of Professor Michelle Trim and doctoral student Nader Akouri, and involving over 60 volunteers from our community, which is just amazing. And that group has gone on to form a number of working groups that are really working to take real action, meaningful action against racism. I could not be more proud. Along that same lines, though, we also invited our community, even if they couldn't get involved in a working group, or even if they could, to take a pledge that we would educate ourselves, our college, and our university to recognize and work against structural racism, especially in computer science and tech. As of yesterday morning, over 125 community members have signed that pledge. For today's conversation then, to celebrate the signing of the pledge as we promised, we have invited Assistant Professor Narges Mahyar, doctoral student Alyx Burns, and undergraduate researcher Andrew Cunningham to speak about their research, looking to the past to visualize the present, revisiting W.E.B. Dubois' abolitionist visualizations. Their work is an excellent example of computing for the common good, and in particular, the ability of computing, in this case data visualization, to shine a light on systemic racial oppression. So the way this is going to work, the research team will speak for about 30 minutes, with another 5 to 10 minutes for questions. And then Erica Dawson-Head, our Director of Diversity and Inclusive Community Development, will be leading a conversation in which we all will get to participate and talk about what we've learned over the past 4 months. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Andrew Cunningham to get us going.
Hi, everyone. I'll look at the screen share here. How are we looking? Can I get the obligatory thumbs up? Nice. Okay. So I want to just start by thanking the College of Information and Computer Science here at UMass for putting this talk together, this discussion. So as the Dean introduced, our talk is called Looking to the Past to Visualize the Present, Revisiting W.E.B. Dubois' Abolitionist Visualizations. And actually, that is a common mispronunciation. Dubois did specify that he had a preference for Dubois instead of Dubois to break from the French colonization. But yeah, so our team is me, Andrew Cunningham, the grad student Alyx Burns, and Professor Narges Mahyar. So I will get right started with talking about some of our influences in the conversation of data abolition. The first of which is Race After Technology, a book by Ruha Benjamin. There's a book club here at UMass that's discussing this book. It has been incredibly influential to our education of the topic of data abolition. And I definitely recommend reading this book and joining the book club to engage in this dialogue. We were also very inspired by the talk Abolish Big Data, which is by Yashima Bay Milner. She's the founder for Data for Black Lives. And there's also a book, Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks, that played as a key inspirer of our work. And all of these informed our vocabulary surrounding data abolition and also provided us with case studies which have continued to be cited by us and used to propel this dialogue that we've been engaging in. And we will be talking about these works throughout a little bit. They're also referenced in our paper quite a bit. So our journey with data abolition very directly led us to this article by Amanda Makulik, which was written right following the murder of George Floyd and in the wake of COVID-19. And it's basically saying that we should be mobilizing around racism as a public health crisis. It shows all of the same symptoms of a public health crisis. It is responsible for the loss of life of people, the lowering of quality of life. It is affected by and affects the same factors that a public health crisis would affect. So we use this article as a framework for our own work in handling the conversation of anti-racism and in directing our labor towards anti-racist work. And it led us into the idea of amplifying the work of others, of marginalized voices who haven't traditionally received platforms, and leveraging our positions to give those platforms to those works, which led us to explore the work of W.E.B. Dubois. So this is a 6-part article series by Jason Forrest, and it talks about just the power of Dubois' visualizations. It was regarded by Jason Forrest as one of the most powerful examples of data visualization. And this is partially because this was a work that came just after the abolition of slavery, and it was created by an all-Black team of data scientists who were able to secure resources and to create a very detailed snapshot of what America looked like in 1900 racially. And it's a snapshot that we can continue to refer to and compare modern data to, which is exactly what we sought out to do. So the work of Dubois, and this is a picture of W.E.B. Dubois, his work took the form of 63 visualizations, which he presented at the 1900 Paris exhibition. Here's a picture of the exhibition, specifically of his exhibit within the exhibition. And you can see it's just a series of many visualizations, and these visualizations came together to look at census data that was gathered by the team and woven together to tell this story of Black resilience following the dismantlement of oppressive systems like slavery. And this narrative that they wanted to tell through the story of optimism took the form of showing us all of the opportunities that were suddenly being seized by Black people now that these systems were systems of the past, largely. And so we also looked deeper into the historical context of these visualizations, looked more into depth at each individual visualization by reading the book W.E.B. Dubois' Data Portraits, Visualizing Black America. This was a book put out by UMass's very own Professors Whitney Battle-Baptiste and Britt Russert. And without this work, we would not have been able to explore the journey of Dubois' work in the way that we were able to. So I just want to personally and as a team thank them for putting this together and keeping this story alive. I also want to thank the Dubois Center for all of their work on campus in anti-racism and directing conversations around racism. So with that, I want to get into the process of what we did. So first, we chose 7 visualizations out of Dubois' 63. And we chose these based on a few factors. For one, we wanted to fit them into 5 categories. So they're the categories of wealth, job opportunities, geography, educational opportunities, and incarceration. And so within those categories, we then chose data visualizations which had data readily available that was easily translatable to the data of the past. So they had to hold a level of relevance to the present and be accessible to us. So, so we searched for appropriate data through the US Census largely, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Justice, and then we also referred to the National Alliance to End Homelessness and the publication Education Week. And we just gathered a whole lot of data points to convert all of the data from the charts that we chose from 1900 into more modern revisitings of those charts. So the first step was this not super pretty, in my handwriting, chart that was hand-drawn. We wanted to spend time physically recreating these charts, just as Dubois' team had done before we prettied them up, so that we could really sit with the data and unpack some of the narratives attached to it. And then we scanned those and we digitized them and ultimately made these more stylized versions that more closely resembled Dubois' original. And with that, I do want to thank Alberto Cairo for his help in the process of styling the charts and helping us navigate photo editing software, which allowed us to do so. This was quite a procedure and a learning process that was really cool to explore. So the final product was this. The bottom row is the original series of Dubois charts, whereas the top row is our revisitings of those. And we're just going to walk through those one by one and talk about some of the narratives that we unpacked. So the first one is a chart on the rate of slavery leading to and following the Emancipation Proclamation, which abolished slavery in the United States legally. And so this chart spans from 1790 to 1870. And we can see the red area here is, it's an area chart, and the red area represents free, Black people who are free from slavery. So this dashed line represents 2%. So a pretty low rate overall, leading to emancipation. But then we see at the end, once slavery is officially abolished, we see this leap to 100%. And the chart here is torn to emphasize the significance of that. So, and it also, on the other hand, emphasizes the significance of the 2% roughly rate of freedom prior to emancipation. So it allows us to zoom in and really take in these numbers as being significant strides. But then at the very end, once the Emancipation Proclamation is passed, once slavery is legally abolished, it allows us to make a leap off of the graph. So the data is going literally off the chart. And this is a really exciting moment in history. This is the dismantlement of an oppressive system. So our modern equivalent is looking at incarceration data as the modern day topic of abolition and the modern day counterpart to slavery. We look at incarceration between 1980 and 2018. And the rate here is 99% rate of freedom. So the red area still represents the rate of freedom, whereas the black area represents the rate of incarceration. Now, significantly worth noting is that 1980, we chose to start at 1980 technically because this is when we started consistently recording race data in incarceration, but also significantly is that this is the start of Ronald Reagan's presidency. And Ronald Reagan introduced an era of tough on crime rhetoric, which persisted bipartisanly from 1980 through 2000. And this tough on crime rhetoric disproportionately affected the Black incarceration rates in the United States. So we see the rate of freedom decline sharply from 1980 all the way through to 2000. And then from 2000 to 2018, we see a much more warped, lower rate of decarceration, which leaves us today with a rate of Black incarceration that is still double the rate it was in the 1980s after years of steady reform. So, so part of what we see in this narrative, and we tore the page on the right side for this visualization, because part of this narrative here is that there's still so much work to be done. And we're never going to see the sort of optimism that Dubois' chart was able to display if we don't actually address and dismantle the systems that are leading to a disproportionate incarceration in Black people versus white people in the United States. So we wanted to really zoom in on this end of the graph. Yes, we've come a long way in that slavery is no longer a system, which it never should have been in the first place, of course. I don't need to say that. But incarceration is still a system, and it is still robbing people their right to vote, and it is still forcing them to direct their labor towards their prisons free of charge or for criminally low wages. So there's still much work to be done here. And we haven't reached our 100% point because we haven't actively tried to dismantle these systems. So moving to our next chart, this is Dubois' chart that looks at the jobs that were now available after abolishing slavery. So it's a basic bar chart that shows a raw count of Black people who are employed in certain fields. So the top two are agricultural laborers and farmers and planters. And Dubois also adds up all of the lower columns or lower bars into one bigger bar to show that while all of these opportunities are becoming available, there's still work to be done, of course, in making these equal opportunities towards agricultural labor. The bar is still not even third place in the highest employer of Black people. But it is still an optimistic visualization ultimately, because these are all jobs that previously weren't fathomable to have this sort of paid labor. So we revisited this and we saw actually the trend continuing positively into the modern charts. We see a much more even distribution of job opportunities. We see that the top two jobs are now office and administrative support and transportation and material moving, which are very different from the typical agriculture work that happened in 1890. Though this is partially just part of moving forward in the times. Agriculture was a huge employer back then. It no longer is as big of an employer, but still this is optimistic. What isn't shown as much in this data, since it is just solely looking at Black employment, is the disparity that is present. And that is much more visible in this next chart, which is a pie chart that compares Black employment, the top wedge, with white employment, which is the bottom wedge. So this is color-coded by industry. We can see the biggest chunk is agricultural, fisheries, and mining, followed by domestic and personal service. So we don't see as much disparity in agriculture, actually, in Dubois' original chart from 1900. What we do see is a big disparity in domestic and personal service. We see that 28% of Black Americans are employed in this field versus the 5.5% of white Americans. And we see that the slivers at the bottom on the white employment, the manufacturing and mechanical industries and the trade and transportation industries can be added up to equal the domestic and personal services, which is a little bit alarming. It's it's a clear disparity back then, which has then persisted into our modern counterpart under different names. So we can look at these employment opportunities as sort of a direct product, not a one-to-one mapping, but a direct product of the past. We changed the colors on our modern chart because the only field that remained in one of the top 5 documented Bureau of Labor Statistics occupation fields is service, which we just mapped to domestic and personal service. So again, we have the top wedge being Black employment, bottom wedge is white employment, and then the purple represents management. So there's a disparity of 9% in management. There are 41% of white folks employed in management versus 32% of Black folks employed in management. And this is in part from cyclic poverty, generational inherited lack of opportunity from segregation. And there's also, we can see a continued disparity in the one category that remains consistent between these charts, which is service. So we see 24% of Black people are employed in service versus 16% of white people employed in service. This is a continued disparity that directly impacts the wealth and the general well-being that Black people are able to achieve based on the hurdles, the systemic hurdles that have been that have persisted through generations of oppression. And we can see that even deeper reflected into this chart, which is on pauperism. And this is from 1900, so pauperism is no longer a system in the United States, but But in this chart, Dubois looks at the rate of pauperism in Black Americans. So it's 86 paupers to every 100,000, which is an optimistic chart in that does look to be a small dot on a much larger chart. The brown area represents the total Black population, the 100,000 to every 86, small red dot. And then there's a bar beneath that shows the gender breakdown of pauperism. In our modern chart, we couldn't get intersectional data that combines race and gender, but what we could get was the rate of homelessness, which is how we translated pauperism into now. It's the closest resembling system. And we see now this much, much larger red dot, which is a rate of 552 homeless people for every 100,000 Black people. It is a confrontational dot. It is a persisting tragedy through generations of oppression, and it is a symbol of inherited wealth gaps. As the wealth gap in the United States has grown, so too has the distribution of wealth in the hands of the powerful and the people who are oppressed by the powerful. So in this chart, we very visually see how history has bled through into our present in this very tangible sense. We can also sort of see this in geographic trends. This is a chart that Dubois made in 1900 on the distribution of Black populations throughout southern states compared to all of the northern states combined. So we can see the top three populated states, Black population-wise, are Georgia, Mississippi, and South Carolina. And the population of all other states, so all of the northern states, is actually lower than all three of those individually. So there's a concentration of Black population in the southern states because of slavery. This is where these are the states that held on to slavery and forced people to stay within their borders and to stay concentrated in one place. And so in the modern day counterpart, we see a much larger distribution. We can now see Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina. They're no longer sorted by totals. So Dubois were sorted from most populated to least populated. We decided to keep Dubois ordering so we could see the shifts. And so we can see that all other states far outnumber the individual populations of Georgia. This is an optimistic reminder that things have changed over the years. What is a little bit remaining of the past concentrations of population is when we look at a map of the overall country and how it's shaded by population. So this is the Black population by state as of Dubois' visualization. The darker color corresponds to a higher Black population. Black states are the most populated. So here we can see our counterpart, and we can see Georgia as the most populated by Black population between both of the graphs. So on Dubois' chart, we can see a very clear distribution of Black population, very concentrated in the South. In our modern counterpart, we can see that the Midwest and Northwest areas have really grown in Black population and account for a lot of the distribution that we saw in the previous graph. However, when we look at Georgia specifically, and we look at the area surrounding Georgia, we still see that that is the darkest shaded area. And you can even normalize that by raw population of the area, because of course, Georgia, Florida, Texas, New York, they're all very populated states, but they are still disproportionately Black populations. So they have kept remnants of their past in this sense. So the idea that geography can proxy in for race, as it has both in legislation and in algorithms, is very confrontational in this graph. Ruha Benjamin gives some good examples of this, where legislators, I mean, one very clear example is gerrymandering, which directly takes the voice of a lot of Black voters, but Ruha Benjamin also provides examples of legislation which disproportionately target urban areas with welfare restrictions. So these are coded legislations that proxy in geography for race and contribute to the perpetuation of systemic oppression. And this can happen, this can just seep into our data. As you can see, it's baked into our data. So while it has been purposefully used in that way, it can also be used unintentionally in that way. The default behavior of an algorithm which makes decisions based on data is to be racist because of this very fact that our history is baked with racist data. So this next chart is looking at education, because this is another really pivotal point of success gauging in the United States. And so Dubois' original chart looks at the growth of Black educators between the years of 1889 and 1897. And we can see that the rate of growth is consistently, there's a consistent increase in Black educators. We go from 2,500 Black educators to 3,300 in about a decade. And that was a very optimistic growth at the time when the representation was, of course, at an all-time low in education. And so this bubbling up of Black educators was really exciting to see. Here we have those numbers. And when we revisit that with our modern chart, we don't see it as much of a bubbling up. We still see a bubbling up. So we see from 1991 to 2016, we see our numbers go from 212,000 teachers, 212,000 Black teachers specifically, to 256,000 Black teachers. And that's a lower percentage-wise change, which could be thought of as just a natural plateau. But when we compared this outside of this work against the overall rate of growth of teachers, the overall rate of growth of teachers is an exponential curve, and it goes way up. Whereas the linear growth of Black teachers, Black representation within the field of education is does not keep up with the exponential curve. So we don't have that representation. And when we combine that with geographic disparities and wealth disparities, we have a recipe that breeds disparity in educational opportunities for Black Americans. And at the very core of that, that of course limits occupational success and all sorts of other gauges of you know, ability and room to succeed in the United States, but also even indirectly in our algorithms, a lot of algorithms look at education. For instance, even in our US court systems, we have a bail sentencing algorithm. So it helps judges determine what the bail should be set at for defendants. And that takes in education as a factor. And audits of that algorithm have shown that it has racial disparities in its decision making. And that could very easily be due to a proxy in education. So what can we do when we're working with data to make sure that these things don't happen? How can we be anti-racist in data? Well, for part of it, we need to have an abolition movement in data. We have to read abolitionist literature and reimagine what our structures are, how we're using it. Are we telling stories? Are we understanding the narratives? Or are we just perpetuating cycles that have already been existing? We need to apply tenets of critical race theory to human-computer interaction. This means that we have to learn how to combat racism within our own systems and our own designs, and we need to learn how to recognize it and see how it comes up. This means that we're not just waiting for some red flag to come up that is directly racist. We're not going to have algorithms that spit out slurs if there's something wrong. We're going to have algorithms that slowly and subtly over time just oppress people in the slightest minuscule ways that really bubble up. We need to be conscious of how our work's received by other people. We need to review our work with other people of different perspectives and different views, and be conscious of our level of privilege and the level of privilege of people that we want our work to be received by. And we need to be thoughtful directly and explicitly of who's on our research team. We need to make sure that we're actively trying to recruit marginalized people to our work, to work towards a stronger structure of objectivity. No work is objective, but as you have more perspectives at the table, you can start to get there. And this also means to seek out work outside of our own and referencing and amplifying the voices of people from other perspectives, and citing them in our work and listening to them, understanding what they're trying to say, and trying to bring their work to the mainstream. And lastly, we need to realize every implication of the history of the data that we work with, and we need to figure out what sorts of narratives are already at play in any of the data that we use, and how we can work towards making those narratives that we align with and narratives that are productive. So that's all we have for the presentation today. Our paper is available at that link. So if you go to the HCI Viz, you can find contact information for all of us, the whole paper, but I'll also take questions here.
Right, so if people want to ask a question, if you could use the participants list and just raise your hand, and I will be happy to call on you. We have time for a few questions. And by the way, Andrew, thank you for just a brilliant talk. That was outstanding, and I certainly learned things from it, and I'd read the paper, so there you go.
Thank you, it means a lot.
Questions, anybody? Seems like they're all silenced by your brilliance, although you're getting a lot of chat comments to the effect that people really enjoyed it.
Aw, thanks. I can't see those yet, but I'll look at them soon.
Call hand.
Okay, Erica has something to say, or no? Just you went up and then you went down. There you go, Erica.
Andrew, I just can't tell you how wonderful this presentation was. I could see this presentation at many of conferences, just blowing them away. The way you presented it, and I'm so amazed at, can you talk a little bit more about, I was kind of amazed at the homelessness. It really blew me away that people are more homeless now than at that point in time. And something else that was really interesting that I'd love for you to talk a little bit about was, I made a note of it because I was like, oh my gosh, occupations in America, talking about COVID, and talk a little bit about some of those implications that can be found because of that. I mean, we're talking about the service economy. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, I will go back to the homelessness visualization. That one was very, very alarming. And so part of that, which I briefly touched upon, but would love to give more detail to, all of Dubois charts, or most of Dubois charts, are unnormalized. So they're only looking at the Black experience without comparison to others. This helps kind of fuel the optimistic narrative, whereas there was, of course, a lot of disparity at the time. And so part of this is that there's just a rise of homelessness in general. There is a huge wealth gap issue in the United States, and a natural byproduct of that. There's, of course, a huge disparity. I can't remember the exact numbers, but you can find it with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. There's, of course, a disparity between Black homelessness and white homelessness and most kinds of homelessness. But this is just generations of continued cyclic poverty mounting up. The rich are always getting richer, and the poor are always getting poorer, because that's just kind of a byproduct of our system. Opportunities breed opportunities. So, so this is really just a growing issue that hasn't been sought to be abolished in the United States. It is kind of a whole structural buildup of homelessness. In terms of the occupations, which was back a few more, this one was also really alarming. This is a kind of similar answer with some extensions. I mean, like the opportunities for sure are determined in part from the education afforded to people. I mean, this one was really hard to grapple with in a lot of ways, and especially, as you mentioned, through COVID, where the service industry was the first to kind of get the boot. And same with, I mean, even within like management, when I was looking through the data on my own, outside of the visualizations, a lot of the positions that white people held were of higher power and less dispensable, traditionally speaking, than the positions held by Black people. And there's a whole lot that goes into that. I mean, there are algorithms that have directly thrown away resumes that had Black sounding names. These are things that computer scientists are often aware of, but sometimes surprised to hear. And so when we have such deeply ingrained inequalities, and then we throw a little data in there and a little bit of automation, those are just abstracted away from being human. So a lot of opportunities have really just solidified themselves in the latter. And yeah, COVID has been a tragedy that has, and also, like, if we think about this 8% disparity in Black employment in the service industry, and also how we've seen that Black people are disproportionately infected with COVID, people in the service industry are also disproportionately infected with COVID. So that comes as, unfortunately, tragically, not as surprising as it should be. So.
Great analysis, Andrew. We have one more question from Pam Starwaz, and then I know that Erica wants to get us into some discussion. So Pam, your question.
Thanks. Andrew, we had met last year at the tech fair briefly, and I'm so excited to see you doing this work. I was just wondering a little bit more as I try to wrap my head around truly the very last slide of looking at aspects of critical race theory as we do this work. And not that I'm doing the computer science work you're doing, but just in general, you know, fleshing that out a little bit more, or thinking, you know, I have not had the opportunity yet to read the paper, but if there are things that stood out to you beyond this, or just speaking a little bit more on some of these suggestions.
Yeah, yeah, this can be a hard one to grapple with, because we are in a field that is very predominantly white. For instance, my team that worked on this doesn't have Black members. So it's a tough one to internalize in that sense. So we decided to try to make up for that by citing majority Black work and listening to a lot of Black voices talk about the subject, doing what we could. I think one really important lesson for white allies is one that I actually heard from a friend of mine, Mia, who is Indigenous, and who says that a lot of white people set out on this work and are afraid to have opinions or have, like, put work forward because they are white, and they're afraid that they know nothing because they're white. And that's a common kind of misinterpretation of this. And it often leads to white people trying to vet all of their work through any BIPOC people that they know, which puts a huge load on BIPOC people. So this isn't to say that you need to make sure that your team has, it doesn't mean that you have to force representation onto people who already have a pretty full load. It means that kind of what stands out to me of this is that you need to make sure that those perspectives are somehow represented in your work. And there are a lot of ways of doing that, but it really is primarily listening. And part of listening is not projecting your ideas to people and listening to what they have to say about them, but actually listening to their leadership on those issues. So adopting language like data abolition and the movement to abolish data, even if the word like abolition makes you feel uneasy. I know that it can be overwhelming to think of like dismantling systems that we've learned so well, but when people of color are talking about systems that are hurting them and the need to abolish them, I think it's our duty to at least hear them out and adopt some of their language and approach that constructively. So it's really, these points to me are very dialogue oriented, and it's not so much you can take in the whole paper and just immediately apply each of these like step-by-step, check the box. It's a conversation that is mostly going to consist of you searching things on your preferred search engine, and really listening and taking in as much as you possibly can, and trying to recognize power structures too. Power structures are a huge part of that, and they're everywhere in everything that we do. So really working to tear those down when we can and get to what's at the bottom of those power structures.
Okay, I want to give Narges a chance to have a last word here. I assume you don't have a question for Andrew, Narges.
I just want to thank both Andrew and Alyx for their engagement and passion to take this work to this level. This work just started as a project in my Computing for Common Good class, but they were both committed to take it further and make it to this amazing project. I just want to amplify what Andrew said in his talk, that all we can do is to commit ourselves to take actions and, really fight racism, injustice, inequality in any way that we can in our work. It could be by telling stories and visualizing data, or, building better algorithms and better systems, or many different ways.
And audit algorithms too, when you can.
Okay, well, I'd also like to thank Andrew, Alyx, and Narges for your leadership and for getting this whole thing going. And now we're going to turn to the reflection part of this meeting, and I'm going to turn things over to our own wonderful Erica.
I can't tell you how excited I am at that wonderful presentation. It's great to see all the windows opening. I get to see all the faces now. So one of the cool things is that we get to reflect over this time of how we have been working in anti-racist ways. And I'd love to have some people come and share their experiences and what they've done, whether nothing is too small, nothing is too big to share before I start calling on names, because I know people's names. Okay, thank you, thank you. I see two. Narges, let's start with you. You can unmute and.
I have a feeling they left their hands up from the last time. So ladies, if you didn't mean that, you need to take them down.
No. If not, I'll take Pamela. I can always count on Pam. Come on, Pam, tell us what you did in an anti-racist way.
My hand was still up from last time too.
Oh, I'm still taking you, Pam, because I know who you are and I know that you're constantly working. So I'd love to start with you.
Oh gosh. I've been more consumed by economic disparities than racial disparities in the past few weeks. So looking at that, but I don't want to deny the importance, obviously, of what we're talking about. So I'm trying to think of something. Certainly every day we try to think about. Oh, actually, no. Today I had a discussion with a new transfer student, and I was able to connect her to some resources and just talk to her. She talked about not being able to reach out, which is very common. Oh, sorry, my video is not. Very common among lots of students. The not, as willing to reach out. And I said, okay, well, I've given you these list of folks to check in with and talk about. How about we check in 2 weeks, and we'll keep checking in. And she's like, yeah, that really helps me when I was in community college, like people checking up on me more frequently. So, just looking at ways to keep, this happened to be a Black woman, to keep BIPOC and other potentially underrepresented students like women in the program.
Thank you so much, Pam. I think that as we go on, it's so important, especially when we're looking at not even just race, but gender, because disproportionately women have been leaving their positions. And this is something we're going to talk about in addition to, imagine if you have a different identity on top of it. So it's really great that you're doing that. Michelle Trim.
Hello. So I wrote a bunch of things in the pledge that I was going to do. I've done a lot of reading, but I think the thing that I'm proudest of is when we we're looking for more readings for 305, but in particular, in shifting my Info 101 class to online, and it's big now, it's got 110 students in it. I made an effort to include as many readings by people of color as I could, in particular, people of color who are practicing in computer science or in tech fields. And I like to think that I've always been somewhat sensitive to identities of and perspectives of the readings that I give students in class, but I guess what I'm saying is now it's in my top 3 things to look at, as opposed to maybe the thing I think about, when most of the other stuff is done. So.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Something so, just adding those authors in there and people that are people of color in there, it makes a big difference. Andrew.
Hey there. So in my pledge, I said I would finish up the White Fragility book group, which I did with you and Emma, and it was fantastic. Also, I wanted to study more about the police abolition and prison abolition movements. And so I read a book by Alex Vitale, The End of Policing, on police abolition, and Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis on prison abolition. They were both very good.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I think that we're winding down and I'm very scared of time. Come on, let's have one more. Come on, don't make me stick you. I see you, Jaime. Don't scratch your hair because I feel like that's your hand going up to say what you're going to contribute.
Oh, I can say, I have to confess, so I originally said, yeah, I'm going to also read White Fragility. That was very instructive. I'm reading as much as I can. I appreciate all the book clubs that your office is organizing. I have to say that a lot of what I'm doing right now is thinking about things, and in particular, how do I provide equity to students in my classroom? And thinking, I take that issue of equity very seriously. I don't have to offer everyone the same thing. I have to offer to each person what they need, and that might be different from different people. And what does that mean? And how do I differentiate? And my struggle with that, in particular, finding the time to provide everyone with what they need, regardless of what the multiple identities are. And it's interesting because someone asked me about what they were asking about what they could do with their own class, a situation. And I just said, it's nice to be asked about these things, because then you end up giving an answer that you say, oh, I better apply that answer to myself now. And the answer was, this might be untractable. It might be undoable with your classes if they're too big, but you might want to try it. And when you run out of time, then you deal with that issue. In the meantime, do whatever it is that you can. And if worse comes to worse, deal with that when that moment comes. So right now, that's what I'm doing.
Thank you, Jaime. Absolutely excellent. And it looks like Laura is all set to bring us into this. Go for it, Laura. It's a perfect way.
I was just going to say that, like Jaime, I participated in a bunch of the book groups over the summer, and props to you and Emma. Those were just amazing, really eye-opening and great experiences. In terms of taking this on into my day job, I think I've made it my personal mission to make sure that we continue to focus on these issues. But I also take it much more into thinking about the administration of the college, thinking of my roles and responsibilities with all the different constituencies we have, and how can I ensure, how can I just ask myself one extra time before I react to somebody, whether there might be circumstances that I'm not as aware of because this person is in some different group than I am. Or may have come out of things. And this is, for the faculty, trying to understand where their challenges are right now, because it varies dramatically depending on gender, race, family status. There's a whole lot of things that go into that. For the students, trying to make sure that they're getting the support that they need, understanding that not all of them are in good places in which they can work and focus, and how do we support them. And with the staff, just trying to be very aware again of some of those same sorts of issues. They actually have some of the same issues of both the faculty and the students in different ways. And how can we do what we can as a student within the construct of the university to help? And how can we understand the variability and the differences? So that's what I wanted to say from a personal level. My pledge was around getting educated. I've continued to read after the book groups were over. I wish I could be participating in the ones this fall because they sound awesome, but I'll just have to catch up later. My schedule doesn't deal very well with regularity right now. So are there any more questions or thoughts for Erica, discussion that people would like to bring forward? I know that, you know, let me put it this way. A lot of you are being very quiet, but a number of you have participated in our discussions throughout the summer. A number of you are on the care committees and now the work groups that are going forward. Every single one of you is making a difference. And your pledge and your commitment to thinking this way also makes a difference. So I am, as I say this every time I get together with a group of you, but I am so proud of this college, and I am so glad to be a member of this college. I am proud of our leadership team. I am proud of our wonderful, wonderful, wonderful diversity officers, our students, our faculty, and the whole rest of our staff that support our students, our faculty, and the business of running this college. You are all in your own ways really contributing to this very important activity and need. And I could not be prouder of the group of you, or more grateful that I am part of this college. So that's all I had to say, folks. So Erica, any parting words?
Our parting words is I can't thank Carrie and her team enough for helping to set all of this up. I can't thank Stephen and engineering for actually turning me on to this. How did I have to get the research from engineering to come here to CICS? So we got to work on that, faculty. I got to know what's going on here. Can't thank you all enough. I can't thank Andrew, Narges, Alyx. You know where my heart is. You guys are just amazing. And the work you do can actually change the world. If people were able to see those actualizations, I mean, wow, what a wonderful way to show people data and to help them to understand how it can be for good. So, and Laura, we want you just as much as you want us. We're glad to be here. So I'm speaking for a good majority of us. I don't know who else is out there, but I'm thankful. So I just want to say, Andrew, everyone that's working with CARE, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone that just did one thing, even if it was, I opened the door for somebody I might have let close. Thank you, thank you. Just make sure you sanitize because you know COVID. But you guys, thank you. You're amazing. Be well, and thank you.
Be well, everybody. Thank you very much. This is not the end.
No.